This is the application for Melissa test from the Tuesday-Thursday class. The first topic I chose is behaviorism. The four terms I chose were behaviorism, stimulus, response, and chains. Behaviorism is the study and science of human behavior. Stimulus is an object or event that is presented and influences learning or behavior. A response is a behavior and is emitted. Chains are a series of stimuli and responses. Here is my concept map showing the terms from behaviorism and psychology as a science. Behaviorism is the science of human behavior. I can use the initial behavior of my students to assess what problems I may be dealing with, and I can change my teachings according to what I'm dealing with. I can make use of chains like classical and operant conditioning that involve stimuli and responses. When I observe unwanted responses, I can use, preferably, operant conditioning to achieve the desired response. Is understanding human behavior through behaviorism more important than understanding human thinking? When it comes to using chains, do you think classical or operant conditioning is more useful? How else can you use stimuli and responses besides classical and operant conditioning? To answer my question, when it comes to using chains, do you think classical or operant conditioning is more useful? I personally think that operant conditioning is more useful. You can more easily modify a student's behavior to get the desired result that you want. Classical conditioning can be useful, but I really do think the operant conditioning is more useful. The second topic I'm going to talk about is memory. The four terms I chose were memory, rote learning, meaningful learning, and schema. Memory is the location where information is stored. Rote learning is based on behaviorism, where everyone is on the same level and is also considered the same as book learning. Meaningful learning is a cognitive process that involves human thinking. Schema is structured group of preconceived ideas, or an organized pattern of thought or behavior. Here is the concept map that includes the terms from psychology as a science, behaviorism, modeling, self-efficacy, and memory. I need to be aware of the role memory plays in the learning process. This can help me adjust my teaching to make the students more successful. I can use schemata in my teaching to help students organize information. While rote learning has its place, I also want to make sure that the students experience meaningful learning. They will understand more this way. Why should teachers be aware of how memory works? How can you incorporate schemata into your teaching? Do you feel that meaningful learning is more important than rote learning? To answer the question, why should teachers be aware of how memory works? It's really important to understand the process because you are helping enable your students to learn something. If you don't know how memory works, you're not going to understand what you need to do to help your students learn and keep that in their memory. Something that I stated earlier was that's something that I stated in my philosophy of teaching paper is that if you don't reinforce an idea within the first 30 seconds of a student hearing it, they're not going to make a protein marker. And then after that initial protein marker is made, you have to reinforce it within the next 8 hours, otherwise it's gone. So really understanding how memory works helps your students learn better. And to answer the question, do you feel that meaningful learning is more important than rote learning? I do. Book learning is important, it helps you memorize things, but meaningful learning really helps students associate one concept to a whole different situation. And that's a thorough understanding of something, and that can really help them in other subjects and just in the outside world. The next topic I chose was individual differences. The four terms I chose were individual differences, working memory, normal distribution curve, and idea. Individual differences occur between individuals. Working memory is also known as short-term memory. It is the memory that actively thinks about and processes information. It is limited to a small amount of information, typically 7 plus or minus 2 chunks. Working memory capacity is directly related to an individual's IQ. A normal distribution curve is a bell shape where most individuals fall in the middle with a few at the extremes. IDEA stands for the Individual Disabilities Education Act, and it is a law that deals with students who have disabilities. Here is my concept map showing the terms from psychologies of science, behaviorism, modeling, self-efficacy, memory, and individual differences all connected to each other. I need to be aware of the role individual differences play in the classroom. Each student is unique and deserves a fair chance. Students will be coming in with different working memory capacities, and my teaching style should reflect this. I need to keep in mind that most of the qualities my students possess will not fit a normal distribution curve. I can use the goals of IDEA to personalize my teaching to ensure each student has a fair chance. Why should teachers care that individual differences exist? Shouldn't all students just be treated equally? Does it really matter that students have different working memory capacities? Are normal distribution curves useful? Do you feel that every student should have something along the lines of an IEP? Or in other words, should an IEP just be limited to students with disabilities? To answer the question, why should teachers care that individual differences exist? Shouldn't all students just be treated equally? Teachers should care that there are individual differences because students shouldn't be treated equally, they should be treated fairly. Being treated equally is different than being treated fairly. If you're treated equally, that means you treat them exactly the same, and that would just be saying that everyone is the same, that there are no differences that need to be accounted for. Treating them fairly means that you take into account the differences that are there and you provide accommodations so that each student has an equal chance of learning. To answer the question, do you feel that every student should have something along the lines of an IEP, or should an IEP just be limited to students with disabilities? I think the answer is that it shouldn't just be limited to students with disabilities. It doesn't necessarily have to be what an IEP is, but each student should have their own kind of, if you want to call it a plan of action, where each student has different needs, and that plan of action addresses those needs so that you can give each student an equal chance of learning and succeeding. The next topic I am going to talk about is development. The terms that I selected are development, zone of proximal development, scaffolding, and concrete operational. Development is a process of growth. The zone of proximal development includes a range of difficulty where tasks can be performed by a learner with help, and this is the area where learning occurs. Scaffolding is assistance that is offered to a learner that is in the zone of proximal development. And the concrete operational stage is a stage of logical development in which there is limited logical decision making. Here is my concept map that includes development that is tied to psychologies of science, behaviorism, modeling, self-efficacy, memory, individual differences, and group differences. I will need an understanding of development to assess where my students are. I would expect that many of my students will be in the concrete operational stage, which means that logical decision-making can occur, but abstract thought has not quite developed. This will affect how I teach. The process of scaffolding and the zone of proximal development are key components to helping my students succeed. I want to make sure that they are always in their ZPD and work to raise each student's ZPD through scaffolding. Why is it so important to understand that our students are still developing? Of what importance is the concrete operational stage? Do you think that a student's ZPD can be raised without the use of scaffolding? Here's my final concept map, showing the 4 terms that I selected from each of the 10 topics from the whole semester.